Hey, welcome back to The Wealth of Nations. This is Chapter 9 of The Profits of Stock. So this chapter builds off of Chapter 8 by saying the factors that influence the rise and fall of the wages of labor are the same factors that influence the rise and fall of the profits of stock, and that is the wealth of a nation. However, the wealth of a nation will influence these two things very differently. Increase in stock, which raises wages, has the tendency to lower profit. This is because a growth of stock will increase competition between rich merchants. So first things first, how can we measure the average profits of stock? Well, this can get really difficult as there's random costs along the way in the manufacturing process. And this cost of manufacturing will also be impacted by the fluctuating prices of the commodities necessary for them to make their products. So these random costs that can occur during the manufacturing process, plus the changing prices of commodities, means that your average profit of stock will change pretty rapidly over time. This means that profits of stock change year to year, month to month, and hour to hour. But fortunately, we can still get an idea of the patterns of the average profits of stock by looking at the changing interest of money. This is because we can expect money to move towards those industries which have a high potential for profit and move away from those industries which have a low potential for profit. Therefore, we can expect for the interest of money to rise where the profits of stock rise and to sink where the profits of stock sink. So first we analyze the changing interest rates from King Henry VIII to about Queen Anne. And here Smith observes the changing legal interest rate from about 10% or lower to around 6 to 5% or lower. So these numbers indicate a gradual slowing of England's growth. But also during this period, the wages of labor were continuously increasing, and in the majority of the branches of manufacturing, the profits of stock were diminishing. Now let's look how the profits of stock change from area to area. So first of all, it generally requires more stock to carry out a trade in the city as opposed to the countryside. Additionally, the amount of stock employed in each trade, plus the number of competitors available, lowers the profits of stock in the cities in comparison to the countryside. However, the wages of labor are typically higher in the city than in the countryside. That's because in the city, those with great stocks are unable to get the amount of workers they want. So then they need to compete against each other for workers, which raises the wages and lowers their profit. In contrast, in the countryside, there is not enough stock to employ all the people, which means workers compete against each other for jobs, lowering their wages and increasing the profits. So now we turn our attention to England and Scotland. At this time, the legal rate of interest in these two countries was the same. However, the market rate of interest was higher in Scotland than in England. So even though England is a richer country than Scotland, the profits of stock are higher in Scotland than in England. This is because Scotland, having lower amounts of stock, has less opportunities for employment, and therefore workers are more inclined to compete against each other, which lowers the wages and increases the profits. And because the profits are higher in Scotland, so is their market rate of interest. Okay, time for our mid-video review. So a big town / richer country means more stock, which means higher wages, lower profits, and lower interest. And a small town / poor country means less stock, lower wages, higher profits, and higher interest. So the exceptions to this pattern are the North American and West Indian colonies. So in these places, both the wages of labor and the profits of stock are high. So the stock employed in the improvements of such easily cultivated quality lands yields great profits, therefore affords very large interest. Business is so profitable that they're able to hire workers at a faster rate than there's even people available in the area to work. And this higher demand for workers raises wages. However, this scenario of high profits and high wages will not last forever. Eventually, all the best lands in the colonies will become occupied, and so the remaining inferior lands of the colonies will yield less profit than their predecessors did. So the profits of stock will diminish as the colony continues to develop. At the time of writing, Smith notes that the profits of stock had already begun to diminish in the colonies. However, the wages of labor had continued to rise. And this is because although the new stock yielded less profit than its predecessor, it still created more demand for labor. And that additional demand for labor will continue to raise wages. A great stock, though with small profits, generally increases faster than a small stock with great profits. Money makes money. So the acquisition of new territory or new branches of trade will sometimes increase profits even in a country that's becoming wealthier. This is because the existing stock will move towards the more profitable industries. Then in the remaining industries from whom the stock has moved away, competition will decrease. This means a decrease in the variety of goods, which means the remaining competitors will be able to raise their prices, yield more profits, and you'll see higher interest rates as a result. The decrease in competition will lower the demand for labor, which in turn lowers the wages and increases the profits. And again, this raise in profits will be reflected by an increase in money interest. So what happens when the capital stock of a society decreases significantly in size? So decreasing the funds necessary for the maintenance of an industry will lower the demand for workers and therefore lower wages. And you know what that means? Lowering wages means that the owners of stock can bring their products to market at a lower expense, and less stock supplying the market means less competition, so they can sell their products at a higher price. So when a country is otherwise declining, we can observe pretty high profits of stock. What about the opposite scenario, where a country has seemingly unlimited access to stock, resources, labor, etc.? Well, in this scenario, where it's not possible for a country to advance any further and they're not declining, we could expect both the wages and the profits to be really low. This is because such an overabundance of labor will increase competition in a way so as to sink wages. And likewise, the vast amounts of stock will increase competition between producers in a way that their profits will also sink. But nobody's really gotten close to this scenario, except perhaps China, but their isolationist policies prevented them from really achieving the maximum amount of competition. Now, how does law interact with interest? Sometimes, a defect in the law will raise interest rates above or below what the wealth of that society would require. And this is what happens when the country does not take into account the performance of its contracts, and therefore puts normal borrowers on the same footing as bankrupts or people with terrible credit in better regulated countries. And on the other side of things, if a state denies interest altogether, it won't stop it from occurring anyways. And so our final question is, how much profit is needed in relation to interest rates? The answer is, the lowest profit must still be high enough to compensate for the occasional, unexpected losses that might make the borrower vulnerable to the lender. Were it not, mere charity or friendship could be the only motives for lending. If a country were to become wealthy and every branch of industry were to have a great quantity of stock, profits would be so low that the only people able to live off interest in the society would be the very wealthy. The closest real-life example to this is Holland, where it actually became fashionable to be a man of business. However, this is mainly because just so few people could live off of interest, and custom breeds fashion. And on the other side of the coin, the maximum profit that master can get is pretty much everything except what is necessary for the bare maintenance of the workers. In quickly advancing countries, lower profits may compensate the higher wages, and therefore higher wages do not necessarily mean higher priced goods. And as a result, quickly advancing countries may remain competitive with their less thriving counterparts. Alright, that's everything for Chapter 9. I will see you guys next week for Chapter 10.